Hi, in this discussion, we're going to begin with a discussion of tab bar controllers, which are really fairly simple to comprehend. And then we're going to talk about organizing an application using tab bar controllers and also navigation controllers, and how to best apply these two types of controllers in order to achieve a good, coherent, cohesive application organization. So let's get started here. A tab bar controller is an instance of a UI tab bar controller. This is a subclass of UI view controller in the same way that a navigation controller is a subclass of UI view controller. Each view controller in a tab bar controller is represented by an icon at the bottom of the screen, and we've all seen this if we played with an iPhone interface. The users will select between views by tapping the appropriate tab. And as you might expect, what we're selecting between is really view controllers that bring up their own views. So a tab bar controller maintains a relationship with each of its view controllers, and this is housed in a relationship segue. Dragging a relationship segue to a new view controller from a tab bar controller in Interface Builder creates a new tab. And so all we really have to do in order to add view controllers to our tab bar controller is drag a relationship segue. In other words, control and click and drag to a new view controller and then select relationship as for the segue type, and that will create a new tab on the tab bar controller. It's extremely simple to do. Tab bar controllers are appropriate many times as a top-level controller of a large application which branches into other view controllers, or whenever the user must select between different views of the same data. This presents a tab bar controller, really, what I'm saying is, it presents the information non-hierarchically. In other words, we have a flat kind of organization. One view controller can branch to many different view controllers from its top level using a tab bar controller. The user is presented with, another way to say this, of a choice of this or this or this or maybe this. But with a tab bar controller, that is sort of a one-layer presentation. With a navigation controller, on the other hand, the flow is this, then this, then this, as we've already seen in our demos that involve navigation controllers and table views. So tab bar controllers are good whenever the information that we want to present is non-hierarchical, whereas navigation controllers are best suited for a hierarchical flow of information. So what does this mean as far as how we would organize our apps using tab bar controllers and navigation controllers? Well, when we plan the user's interface, consider those views that are going to be needed after we consider the model and how the user is going to move from one of those views to another. And put very simply, whenever that user interface flow should branch, depending on user action, use a tab bar controller. But whenever that user interface flow should be linear, we want to use a navigation controller. There's nothing wrong with embedding one in another. So we can have a nav bar controller inside a tab bar controller, or a tab bar controller inside a navigation controller. And we could do this many different times in many different ways if our user interface and the needs of our model were sufficiently complex. The idea, though, is to keep it as simple as possible and use these various controller types or container controller types as tools to make the user's interaction with the model, with the underlying data, as simple as possible at all times. So we're going to begin working for the rest of the course on an application that is based on our parts class, our simple parts class that we started, I believe, back in Unit 2, and maybe even Unit 1. Let's look at sort of a high-level, unfinished kind of model diagram, or a diagram of the user interaction in our application. At the top level, we have a choice. We have the broad category of C information about parts, C information about assemblies. Under parts and under assemblies, we're going to have other screens available for the user to see. But let's just focus on this parts side. Under parts, we have a parts list, which we could add a new part to, and a part detail. So you're maybe kind of seeing already that this parts list with a new part and a part detail looks like a table. Looks like a table view controller. First of all, we have the word list, which should always trigger our mind to say, if it's a list, I present the list in a table view. I have the ability to add a new part, which I can certainly do in a table view. I'll just push a new view controller onto the table view's navigation controller. And then, of course, I can get a detail by pushing a new view controller onto the table view's navigation controller. So I know that this part should probably be a UI navigation controller. Whereas this part, since it is a choice, should be a UI tab bar controller. So let's see. Yep. In the first case, at the top of the application, this branch, no matter how many leaves that this branch might have, is best set forth using a tab bar controller. Why wouldn't we use a navigation controller? Because we don't want the user to have to page through different view controllers, push, to get to the one they want. We just want them to be able, with a simple interface at the bottom of the screen, select a tab, that view controller comes up. That need is best served by using a tab bar controller. Likewise, the need for this parts list piece is best served by using a navigation controller. So now, the question becomes, who has the model? Remember how we had a tab bar controller, we had a navigation controller? In an app with a single model, or a single model class graph, only the top level controller object would instantiate and communicate with the model. Wait a minute. Does that mean I need to have another view controller that wraps my tab bar controller and navigation controller in the last example? Sure. You could do that. There's nothing wrong with that. You just instantiate a new one, and then you instantiate the tab bar controller and the navigation controller within that higher level view controller, and instantiate the model there, and then everybody talks through one controller, and that's the idea. If we have more than one model, if there's really a good need for your application to have more than one model, then each model is associated with and instantiated by a single top-level view controller within each section of the user interface. Whichever way you choose, whichever way makes most sense, make it make the most sense in deference to the model, because the user's focus should be on the underlying data rather than the flashy or distracting user interface elements that might make up the front end of your app. The form of the interface should follow the form of the data at all times. Our goal as application developers is to expose the data available to the user and not to hide it behind a bunch of nifty user interface controls. Enough said about that. So now, let's say we have a manufacturing model and a parts model. The manufacturing model will probably sit within this tab bar controller because everything related to assemblies and a part is really kind of the purview of manufacturing. We're going to make assemblies out of parts. Whereas the parts-specific model, if we have two models, is probably going to be instantiated within this navigation controller. So this is one way that we could look at how this application that we're just kind of starting to think about might be organized. Okay, thank you very much.